my life sucks because this and this and this and this. And I say, well, what are the good things that are happening for you? In fact, that's how I start out every coaching session. I say, what's going great for you? And some people really struggle with that question. And some people say, oh, well, this is going good, and this is going good, and this is going good. And I help them train their subconscious to focus on that, because whatever you focus on grows, and it also determines how you feel.
Hello, Levelin Up Nation. This is Brigham Blackham, your host, your success story strategist. And today I have my friend Curtis Swenson. He is a thought coach, and he learned to love himself through the book, You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. When you cross that bridge, he noticed a significant drop in fear. These days, we call it anxiety. He was no longer afraid to try new things, start new relationships, and be an authentic self for himself and others. He also noticed that his confidence went through the roof. He wanted more, so he completed the training to become a Louise Hay certified teacher and coach. And man, Louise Hay, that's amazing. I'm so excited to hear a little bit more about that background of yours. And he's got some awesome information for us today. We're going to be talking about not just how our thoughts are important, but if you don't control your thoughts, they will start to control you in your future. And there is a story behind and within your thoughts that if you can control that story, that narrative, you can start to get amazing results. So Curtis, welcome to the call, man. I'm so excited to have you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Well, first off, let's start here. When we talk about thoughts, you said you are the thought coach. I want to hear, why are thoughts so impactful in what you do? Because, man, you branded yourself as a thought coach. I feel like you probably have a lot of background and knowledge about saying why thoughts are so impactful.
Well, the basic concept in my perspective of personal development is what you focus on grows. And so whatever you're focused on is going to grow. And most of us don't have a really good habit of focusing on the positive. We're really good at focusing on the negative. And that's not what we want to grow. And if you look at beliefs, which are really close to thoughts, there's beliefs, and then there's your thoughts, and there's your feelings, your actions, and then your results. And so behavior modification doesn't really last. You can modify your behavior, but if you don't change the belief that's underlying that whole thing, it's not a real lasting change. So thoughts play into that quite a bit. In fact, I've got a concept I could share if you'd like.
Absolutely. I heard that you've got a concept about it was armies and generals and the idea of how they combat. Let's dive into that. I'm excited to hear your concept. Go ahead.
Okay, so experts say that 90% of our results are controlled by our subconscious. I go subconscious, conscious. And if that's true, 90% of our results, would it be a good idea to get our subconscious working for us instead of against?
Absolutely, 100%.
So let's let the subconscious be represented by a vast army of men and women, thousands of men and women that are capable of doing big things. And he who commands them, I call the general, and the general lives in my head. And he hears every thought that I think and every word that I say. And that's how he decides how to command the army. For example, if I'm cleaning out the dishwasher and I drop a glass plate on my tile floor and it shatters into 100 pieces, I might say something like, oh, I'm such an idiot. So the general picks up his megaphone and he says, Curtis is an idiot. And the army leaps into action and starts creating idiotic experiences for me for the rest of the day. You ever had a day like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty normal.
So if I catch myself and I realize what I just did, I say, actually, I'm a genius. And the general picks up his megaphone and he says, scratch that previous order. Curtis is a genius. So the army shifts gears and they go into action, creating genius experiences for me for the rest of the day. And it sounds overly simplistic, but that's actually the way it works. What we focus on grows. We focus. And let me point out a couple of things with those two statements. First of all, am I an idiot? No, that's not even true, is it? That's a lie.
No way.
And that's how we usually are with our negative self-talk. We usually exaggerate it and we tell lies about ourselves. In fact, I'd like to admit that all negative self-talk is a lie. And here's a harder question to answer. Am I a genius?
I think so. It depends on your definition of genius. For me, absolutely.
True.
Someone that is creative in every facet of your mind. Let's hear what your definition of genius is.
Well, in some ways I am, is my answer. It's like, well, yeah, in some ways I'm a genius. And we hesitate to praise ourselves, which is another concept that I teach, because we're afraid we'll be perceived as arrogant, but we don't give ourselves enough credit for the good things that we do. I don't hesitate to call myself a genius, and I don't mean I'm a genius in every way, but I'm a genius in some ways, and so are you.
Yeah.
And so
there's an expression in Mandarin. Is it okay if I add a quick little thought and then we'll keep going? So one of my favorite expressions, I think it's Confucius that says this. It's 三人行，必有我师焉. When three people are walking, all of them are teachers, meaning you can learn from anybody. So everybody is a genius in their own right. They have their own zone of genius, their own lived experience. And just like what you said, when you accept that in some areas of life, you are a genius and you're willing to share it, you can open up a lot of possibilities for yourself. So let's dive back in. You said,
yeah, I love that.
You have to accept that you're a genius. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So I believe that I can learn from anyone. I learn a lot from my clients, and they learn a little from me. They mainly learn from themselves because I ask them questions to bring out what they already know. I help them decide what direction they want to go. I help them decide what are the next steps, and then I hold them accountable. So they're systematically moving toward their goal on a weekly basis. Because I don't claim to know anything. What I do know, my gift is question asking. What I do know is how to ask great questions that brings what they already know out of them, and then they go in that direction. And that's so rewarding.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to think about how you can help someone. A lot of times the answers are within. And if you ask the right questions, it's almost like picking a lock. Eventually, those little tumblers are going to line up and suddenly that lock's going to open.
Oh, I like it.
And they have to open that lock. You ask the right questions, eventually that lock will get open. But if they don't ask the questions, that stays inside them locked up. Their potential stays locked up. Your abilities to take that next step stays locked up. So having great questions, having somebody on the outside looking in saying, what if this were possible for you? What would that look like? And giving them the space to create that possibility for themselves. As soon as you have that space, they can step into it. But if they never create the space because they don't give themselves the creativity and the creative license to open up that possibility, that they'll stay stuck. So let's find a concrete example. When you say you've got this general in the head that says, hey, let's make sure that whatever he says or what he speaks into existence happens. Can you give us a concrete example of that, maybe with a client you've worked with or some experience? You're like, oh, this is a perfect illustration of how this works.
So one of my clients, at the beginning of a 90-day experience, I asked my clients to choose 3 things they'd like to manifest over the next 90 days. And one of them said, I'd like to have a bigger house. We have a big family, and there's nobody in the family has a big enough house where we can all get together. And we decided to call that the gathering place. And we focused on the gathering place, and we created an affirmation. Oh, hello.
This is my little daughter, Dottie.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
So we created an affirmation that he would eventually own the gathering place. And we worked on that. We worked on that longer than 90 days, but the house itself turned out to be over $1 million. Wow. And he wasn't in a position when we started to make the payments on $1 million house. And as we worked together and took steps, he started doing things. Like he reached out to his realtor and he said, what do we got to do to get top dollar from the house we currently have? And they started doing those things. And they went and looked at a few houses. And then they worked with the realtor, they worked with the loan officer, and they took steps every week to move toward the gathering place. And eventually they bought the gathering place. And that was a big day of celebration. I celebrate with cowbells, and usually you can't hear cowbells online, but when someone accomplishes a big goal, we ring the cowbell and we celebrate. And that was definitely a cowbell moment.
That is so cool.
I had another client that was had a pornography addiction. something that I have experience with myself, and he wanted to overcome it. And he actually engaged in my program about building your confidence, which is based on increasing your self-love. And we worked on that half of the time, and the other half of the time we specifically worked on overcoming his pornography addiction. And it actually kind of took care of itself. I found what really helped me was learning to love myself. That was a big step toward becoming healed from that addiction. And when we started working together, he basically started his abstinence program. And by the end of 90 days, he kicked it.
Wow. You think about the long-term effects of being able to shift and say, hey, that one habit getting eradicated from your life and replacing it with something that was positive, that can have generational effects. So like you think about just one of those little things that you do to help somebody. That is amazing. I'm so glad you shared that, because the thoughts that we have when we are not actively trying to do good, like maybe people go and they fall into pornography or they fall into different types of addictions. It takes you down a path that isn't productive. I actually have a really interesting story that happened to me as a missionary. I had my very best day on my mission and my worst day on my mission be the exact same day. And you're like, wait, how does that happen? Well, that evening we were going to have a baptism. There was like 7 people that were getting baptized, were coming into the church. It was amazing. So excited for them. We've been working with them for weeks. Like one of those hurrah cowbell moments, like you were saying, it overcomes so much. I was so grateful. And then earlier that day, one of my favorite people in the world, his name was Staybnbee. He was this 80-plus-year-old man who had joined the church a couple months earlier. We went and visited him, and he said, "Elders, you want to come back in this room?" Because we haven't seen him in a week or so. And he pulled out this picture, and he's like, "Hey, look at these pretty girls." And we're like, "What are you doing?" "No, you're getting into pornography." And that day, he said he didn't want to be part of the church anymore because we made him feel bad about looking at pornography. And I looked back and I was like, that one choice made it so he wasn't able to continue his progression, because he said, "Please just take my name off the records. I don't want to be associated with you guys anymore." And I remember the hurt that I felt, the pain that caused. It wasn't my choice, but sometimes our choices have lasting impacts on other people. And that was one of those moments where I felt completely powerless, because it wasn't something that I could do. I couldn't force him to not look at pornography. I couldn't force him to come back to church, but I could encourage him and say, "Hey, I love you no matter what. I'm here for you no matter what." And a few months later, we went and talked with him again. He still didn't want to be part of the church, but he was still very open and still friendly. And it just broke my heart that little choice made it so that he drifted away and he never came back to church. But the 7 or so people that did join the church, that was such a joyous experience that sometimes we have to go through extreme pain and sadness to experience the joy. And that one day on my mission, I hit both ends of the spectrum of extreme elation and joy and immense depression and sadness from the choices of other people. And I was grateful to experience that. But I remember, man, that was a hard thing to go through.
And that's what life is like. We probably have every day, we probably have some good things that happen and some bad things that happen. And people that deal with anxiety and depression are typically focusing on the bad things that happen. It's like, oh, well, life sucks because this and this and this and this. And I say, well, what are the good things that are happening for you? In fact, that's how I start out every coaching session. I say, what's going great for you? And some people really struggle with that question. And some people say, oh, well, this is going good, and this is going good, and this is going good. And I help them train their subconscious to focus on that, because whatever you focus on grows, and it also determines how you feel. Yeah. And so one of the things I work with people over 90 days on is focusing on the good, because I like to say we choose our attitude, our mood, and our effectiveness by what we choose to focus on and give emphasis to.
Yeah. And I love how you said you're not focusing on 40 different activities, 40 different things. you're like 1 to 3 goals over 90 days. You keep it simple. And then what you do as a coach or a consultant is you keep them accountable to what they want. I had a great friend, Dr. Greg Kimball, bring this up with me. He's like, if a salesman just comes and tries to say, hey, here's my program, I'm going to force it on you, without asking you, what do you want to do? What are you looking to accomplish? And they're just trying to sell you something. But as soon as they're willing to say, well, what are the results that you want? If after 90 days you get these type of results, what would that do for you? Then you create that accountability to make it so they have a platform to accomplish their goals. You become a bridge. And when they make that choice, man, how cool is it to be a small little cog in the system that made it so that they could accomplish their dreams. So for you, Curtis, what is one of the reasons, I mean, your why behind being a coach? Because I know a lot of people have different whys, but what is one of the reasons that you consistently do this? Because you're not brand new at this. You've been doing this for a little while. Let's hear your reason behind doing it.
I originally certified in 1998, and I went through the Louise Hay training to become Louise Hay certified teacher and coach. And I loved it. I just ate it up because I'd recently learned how to love myself. And they basically taught me how to teach other people how to love themselves. Well, nobody was talking that way. Nobody knew that's what they wanted in 1998. I'd never heard of self-love before I read You Can Heal Your Life. And so after holding a handful of workshops, I kind of set it aside. But fast forward 10 years, I was going through a training called the Soul Purpose Intensive. And it was during that training where we did exercises to help us uncover the purpose of our soul that I looked back on and saw some of the pieces of my puzzle. I graduated in psychology. I got trained by the Louise Hay program. In my spare time, I love to meet new people and share stories and help each other. And all my talents and abilities pointed to one thing. And I realized, coaching is not a hobby for me. I was born to coach. So after working for 3 different companies in a coaching capacity over the next 10 years, I finally decided to go into business for myself. And this is 1998. I mean, 2018. So people are talking about self-love. A lot of people have decided that's what their next step is. And so it went pretty well. It kind of took off. And when I take somebody over a period of 90 days from really negative, I'll tell you a story about one of my clients. My sister said, my friend needs your program. She's the most negative person I know. And it must have been a miracle that she actually signed up for 12 weeks. And over the 12 weeks, we do exercises to move you toward greater self-love, which increases your confidence. Mm-hmm. And on week 9, I started out the session with, well, what's going great for you? And she said, well, I went out on a date last night and the guy wanted to learn a little bit more about it. He says, tell me something about yourself. And she said, I freaking love myself. And I was blown away because that was week 9 of 12 from the most negative person that my sister knew. And he was blown away. I said, well, what did he say? She said, he had no response for that. He didn't know where to go with that. And I was celebrating with her. I thought that is the coolest thing ever. And I've had one other client that pretty much got there in 9 weeks. And I'm like, wow, this is when you learn to love yourself, everything changes. As I mentioned in my bio, your fears go down, your confidence goes up. You feel better about who you are. You feel better about who other people are. You become less judgmental and more compassionate. And it's just an amazing feeling. I could talk all day about it.
I love it.
One thing you reminded me of in your comments, I love the way you explained it, is the 75-25 rule. I was coaching a financial coach or financial planner. I was coaching a financial planner, and I taught him the 75-25 rule. I said, if you go in to meet with a couple and you want to talk about finances, if you spend 75% of the time they should be talking, 25% of the time or less you should be talking, and 75% of that 25% should be asking questions. If you follow that rule and you're sitting there, say, for a couple of hours with them, and you're asking questions and they're telling you what they want, you're building so much trust that by the end of the session, they're going to have 2 questions. They're going to say, what do you recommend? and where do I sign?
Because you listened, you gave them a space to clear their mind through actually vocalizing their challenges. I think that's beautiful. Very few
like you said, you're not
Yeah.
pushing on them what you're trying to sell.
No.
Well, what do you want? Where do you want to go?
Right. Yeah.
And
I think, oh, go ahead.
Listening builds influence much faster than talking.
And I think part of great listening is asking good questions and then asking those follow-up questions. Am I right, Dottie? Asking good questions is important. Yeah. She's in. No, so good. So for you, when you are thinking about the story that people tell themselves in their thoughts versus what is reality, let's go there for a moment, because sometimes this is one of the ways I like to coach people. There is a story that you're telling yourself that is no longer serving you, and that story is either slightly true but mostly false, or mostly true with a slight little bit of false, and it is not serving you. As soon as you eradicate that type of a story that isn't helping you anymore, and you rewire that process, you're able to get better results because you're working off of fact rather than an opinion or a story. So what are some ways that you've been able to do that to help people reprogram their thought process?
So instead of eradicate, I like to say replace, because if you eradicate, there's space there. And the thing that fits in that space perfectly is that old story. So I like to say replace the story. And that's where affirmations come in really handy.
Yes.
When I'm helping someone replace a limiting belief with an empowering belief, I say, okay, tell me what's true for you, and they tell me the whole issue. They tell me their story, right? This story that's no longer serving them, and then I say, what would you like to be true?
I like that.
And that stumps them usually for a minute. They're like, well, so I said, what if anything could be true? I have this little magic wand that I use in my coaching. I say, what if I wave my magic wand and I can make anything true? What would you like to be true? And they say, well, gosh, I guess if you have a magic wand, I'd like this and this and this to be true. And I say, oh, okay, well, let's make an affirmation. So we create an affirmation that says that's true, which of course originally starts out to be a lie, especially for them, because they've got this story and that's their reality. But if they can get a little bit of buy-in, if they can imagine that could eventually become true, then I give them 5 steps to start with to replace that old story with the new story so they can start changing their results.
So let me hear if I'm catching this correctly. So you will have them create their own affirmation. You don't force that affirmation on them. You give them that magic wand moment where they get to choose, what do I actually want? Not what does the world want for me, but what do I actually want? And then you help them kind of wordsmith so that after they land, oh, this is how I want it, this is how they articulate it. You give them some simple processes to download that as almost a new operating system. And they do this. Is this like a daily process of saying, here's how I say my affirmations, here's when I say them? Can you explain those 5 processes?
Yeah, it takes daily over a period of time. I usually recommend 12 weeks, 90 days. So yeah, one of the things I do is I teach them the 4 P's of affirmations. When you're creating an affirmation, you want to make it personal, positive, powerful, and present tense. And if they follow those 4 rules, they end up with a pretty good affirmation. And sometimes I ask them questions. I say, well, does that resonate with you? Is that powerful for you? Does it evoke emotion? Because when you add emotion to affirmations, that's turbocharges them. That's when things really start to move. And one of the steps that I recommend is write your affirmation at the top of a piece of paper, and then start a list of things that show that's already true. And I have them come up with 5 things. I help them come up with 5 things so they have a list. And then I say, okay, every day, read this list. And when something comes to mind that belongs on this list, add it to the list. And just keep growing the list. And the more you grow the list, the more your perspective will shift. And your subconscious will start to realize, oh, I said, eventually the list is so long, it weighs so much. It's weighing on your subconscious. Eventually your subconscious says, okay, I give up. This is true about you.
I like that. You're giving yourself enough data to prove that this is true.
Yes.
That's key. That is
Yeah.
key. I think that's a brilliant insight. Thank you for sharing that. You sound like you're going to add one more thing. Go ahead.
Another thing you caused me to think about was one of the 10 benefits of coaching. I mean, there's more than 10, but I have a list
Sure.
called 10 benefits of coaching. One of the 10 benefits of coaching is an outside perspective. You meet with someone, they say, well, this is the story I'm telling myself. Well, they don't say it that way, but I say, oh, that's the story you're telling yourself. So I love that you use that terminology. And then I say, well, is that serving you? And they're like, well, definitely not. And it takes a little bit to get them to believe that they can actually change their reality. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite tools is making that list. I'm like, well, let's make the list. And once the list gets long enough, we're like, oh, I guess this story isn't actually true.
And you get to help them discover that, not force it upon them. I think that's something I loved as a theater teacher. One of my favorite things whenever you're talking about how to, work a monologue or work any scene in a production is what are those moments of discovery that your audience can fill that gap of that's what it is. It's in those moments that there's a gap, and you give your person permission to make that discovery instead of forcing it on them. That's where the magic happens in theater. That's where the magic happens in coaching too, because you're not going to be able to force an epiphany on anybody. What does that look like? It's you don't force epiphanies, but you can give them permission to think. And a lot of times when they connect things that are not currently connected, that connection is their epiphany. And I love being one of the people that is like that electric shock in between those 2 points. You get to be that Jacob's ladder, if you will, of that electricity going from one point to another. It's so exciting to see someone make a shift in their life because of a piece of information, because of a tool, or because of a habit that after time, a slight correction, right? Those little micro corrections that make a huge difference. There's an expression in Mandarin, the difference of a hair can be 10,000 miles if it goes uncorrected. You think about the importance of micro corrections and course corrections on your path. Every time you have a great coach, like you said, they're on the outside of it observing, they can help make slight adjustments and get you back in alignment with where you want to go. And that's the value of having a great coach and a great mentor that isn't emotionally tied to your results, but they are on your team and they want to help you.
And one of the things you're talking about is creating a safe space, creating an environment of non-judgment where it's totally safe for them to say whatever they feel or whatever they think, and no one's going to correct them, and no one's going to say, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or you shouldn't say that. I mean, you can say whatever you want, and sometimes I get some pretty colorful language in my coaching sessions, but creating that safe space, and you're causing me to think of one of my clients who every session, he's connecting dots. He has 2 or 3 breakthroughs every time we have a session. He's just so good at connecting the dots. And mostly what I do is I create that space for him to just be authentically him. I ask a question here and there, and he pretty much just connects dots the whole hour.
I love that. And having a space like that for people where they get to start connecting dots for themselves, and you're not the one drawing the line for them, if you will. That's a beautiful moment, because one of the things that I love about group coaching as well, because we're talking about one-on-one coaching, but there are times where when someone makes a breakthrough and others see that breakthrough, that the witness of the breakthrough actually becomes a breakthrough for others. And one of the things that I'm getting certified in is called tactical transformations, where you take one person, you ask very specific questions to help them make connections. You don't make the connections for them. You don't necessarily know where it's going, but you help them discover where their weakness is, and they self-identify that. And then what are things that they can do to change that? Not things that you force upon them, but things that they can do that's in their power, that's in their story, that they can make those micro shifts. And sometimes those discoveries are so powerful, and they can make a huge difference in how you perceive your value as a coach, because you're not a commodity. That's something that when people say, well, how much do your services cost? I was like, well, that's a really great question. And they may ask for a discount. Like, this is something that I think is really funny. if they ask for a discount, you're like, well, would you like a discount on your future or a discount on your results of who you want to become? You're like, oh, okay. I guess I don't want a discount on that. I want the full quality. So when you're thinking about providing value, you said you have at least a list of 10 things. Why do people, in your opinion, not just hire a coach, but utilize what the coach says and take the friction out so they'll actually make some progress? What are the benefits of the coaching? Yeah, go ahead.
That's a great question. I found what causes them to take the action, which is of course what makes all the difference, is they're paying me money.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do coach for free sometimes. I've usually got 1 or 2 clients that I'm coaching for free because I know they'll do the work and I know they can't afford it. And I've had 2 or 3 in the past that have turned into paying clients. They're like, oh, by the way, I'm getting great value and I can afford to pay you now. And so I'm going to start paying you. And I'm like, great. And so that's one thing is I think I'm almost doing them a disservice if I don't charge them, because when they're paying money, they do the work. When they know, when someone they respect is going to hold them accountable the following week, they do the work. I also have them set up a support team where they have an accountability partner that they're checking in with 3 times a week. So 3 times a week, they got to be accountable, and then me too. And I also have them set up a mentor that they check in once a week. So they've got 5 points of accountability throughout the week, and that really, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it.
I think when people pay, they pay attention. That's something I've heard from multiple people, but it really comes down to if you are actually having a transfer of value, there sometimes needs to be some skin in the game. So when people are serious, not just curious, but they're serious about changing their life and they take those actions necessary, they're going to be happy to pay you because you're giving them so much value. You're helping them get what they want. And the accountability, I think, is the key to being a good coach. There's another expression in Chinese. It's just popped up in my head. This is from that game Go, the one with the little black and white pebbles. When people are playing this game, sometimes the spectators can see the next move better than those playing the game. And that idea of dang guanzhi mi, the people that are playing are confused, and pang guanzhi qing, the people that are on the side observing, have a clear view of the whole thing. Sometimes that's why you need a coach, is because they don't see their next move as clearly as a director or as clearly as a coach, someone that isn't in the game fighting and playing it. So I love that idea. You're doing them a disservice if you don't give them the opportunity to pay and to actually go that final percent there.
Yeah, and the tricky part is you get to ask them questions so that they see the next move instead of telling them what the next move is.
Yeah, because when you tell them, you create dependency. But if you ask them, they create confidence through that independent thought. That's my thought. Is that basically your experience as well?
Yeah, and they're going to be motivated. If it's their idea and if it's what they want, then they're going to be motivated and they're going to take action. And the last thing I want is for me to give them an answer and then they try it and it doesn't work and then they hold me responsible.
Right.
So it keeps me in the clear too. I just say, well, have you considered this? And they're like, oh no, that's a terrible idea because of this and this and this. And I'm like, oh, I'm glad I asked.
That's a great point, because now you're giving them the opportunity to come up with their own answer, and then you just hold them accountable to say, well, did you do the work? We identified the work. Now, do you do the work? And that accountability, you said you do 5 points of accountability: yourself, your partner, and then one other point of accountability where they get to say, I'm doing the work. I'm doing the work. I'm doing the work. The more confidence that comes from saying I'm doing it, the better, I think, as far as a coaching situation, because you're controlling your future when you say, I'm controlling the controllables. I've heard that in multiple facets, but in sports is the main analogy that I think of. If you control the things that you have control over, then you can get results that are phenomenal. But if you are always trying to control the things that aren't in your control, outside of your circle of influence, that becomes insane and you get frustrated and you create anxiety and frustration just runs rampant on you. So let's go here as well. If you could frame this up in kind of like a simple way, that the reason that people don't do what their coach says. I know you've had lots of clients that are like, thank you for that. And they don't do anything. I feel like that's pretty common. How do we avoid that type of action or I guess that inaction, and help people not just identify the work, but to consistently do the work? Because if they don't do the work, they don't get the results, and we want people to get results. So how do you help those people that don't always help themselves?
So I like to say that a coach, one of the values of coaching is I'll ask you questions that you either haven't thought to ask yourself or you don't dare.
That's
and
great.
if I ask those questions, like one of my favorite questions is, well, what's the next step on X? And they're like, and I can tell they haven't asked themselves that question. I like, well, what's the next step? And they're like, well, I don't know. And if you say I don't know in a coaching session with me, I make you add the word yet. I don't know yet. And I'm like, okay, well, let's figure it out. And so they get to figure it out. And of course, how deep the connection is that comes from that question makes a difference. And then the accountability is what makes them go. Accountability is probably the biggest benefit of coaching.
I think you hit that on the nail on the head, because when you have great accountability and there's a little bit of pain attached to it because you paid for it, you have like a little fire under you to get it going and get going in a way that you're going to do the work and finish it. So if I can summarize this, what I've been taking away from you is you ask great questions, you get great answers. And as soon as they identify what they want, you give them multiple reasons to continue down that path. And some of those reasons are accountability. Sometimes you'll paint that picture of possibility for people by saying, well, what if you didn't do this? I love going through this example. What if, even though you say you want this, you didn't do the work and get those results? What's the pain that will happen? And then let's also pleasurescape, where you say, well, after you do it, what's that going to look like? What's the benefit of you actually completing your tasks, going and doing the work so well that others notice it as well? So what are some of the ways that you've been able to help people see that future and increase their vision with more clarity?
Yeah, that's you described it pretty well. Yeah. I have them visualize. I say, well, once you've accomplished this, what's your life going to look like? And that basically comes out of their mouth in affirmations. I encourage that. I say, pretend you're already there and tell me what you see when you look around. And so then they're talking in present tense and they're creating affirmations. And I'm like, wow, isn't that going to be wonderful?
I love it. And you give them the space to play in their new reality.
Sometimes you have to teach people, you have to help people relearn how to dream.
Yeah. Because kids like this, they don't have any problem dreaming, seeing what the future is going to be like. Yeah. Are you excited for the future? Yeah. You're so stoked to be in the future. But one of the things that I see a lot of adults get bogged down with work or with their struggles. There's so many different things that pop up, and maybe things haven't worked out the way they wanted to. And it becomes harder for them to dream and to let go. But if we can remember what it was like to be a kid and to imagine and to go there and to have fun imagining what it would be like to have that real. I wrote a book with my wife a few years ago. It was called Imagination is a Place. It was a quote by her grandpa, Leonard Parkin. We compiled all of his life work. He was a painter. That was amazing. We compiled it into one compilation of his whole life work. And that idea of the imagination is a place that we can go to. I think that's what great coaching does. It gives people a place to imagine what their life can be like. And then you give them the accountability to get there, because it does take work. And I think that's why a lot of people don't have the results that they want, because they're not willing to do the work.
Yeah, they want to take a pill and have the results tomorrow. And since coaching is natural health, it takes a while, and it typically takes at least 90 days to get where you want to go. It's natural health. It works, and you have lasting change, but it's slow.
And anything that is worthwhile typically takes a while. And I say it intentionally like that because it's not something that happens overnight. Things that really matter, like your relationship with your family, the health that you have, it takes iterations and variations and all these different ways that you approach your health, your mentality, your community. All of those are holistic. Every single one is attached in different ways. And you get one more in alignment, and then you can start to bring other parts of your life into alignment. You can't do everything at once, but as you improve one element of your life, it starts to impact and influence those other elements. So to summarize all this, the very last thought here, what would you say to someone that has never done coaching before, but would really love to get some great results? What would you give them as a first step to say, well, if you're ready, do this and you'll get some great results? What's a great first step for someone that's never had a coach?
Well, I sum it up by saying the basic foundational principle is what you focus on grows. And pretty much all the tools I teach are just another way to choose your focus. And if I was only given one tool, I would say, write what you want on the top of a piece of paper and start building a list that shows it's already true. Because most people, they have a limiting belief, but the people outside of them don't see them that way because they're overcompensating for the limiting belief and they're actually being amazing. And the people outside of them are thinking, well, that's already, they choose an affirmation and the other people say, well, that's already true about you. But it doesn't matter how many people tell you that's true about you. You believe it yourself. If you can't accept it, then you still feel bad inside, even though you're doing amazing with your life. And so that's a tricky thing. Getting something. You have been overcompensating. You've created a lot of great results, which is good, because then if you can just shift that belief inside and accept that you're that, you've already got the results. The other option is when we have a limiting belief, we tend to shut down. And then we haven't created much. And that's a little bit harder road. I can get them to believe that they are what they are, but then they still need to create the results.
Yeah. I had a great mentor that he brought up this fact that a lot of times it's not that you're not willing to do certain things. It's that you haven't become the person that does those things yet. People often think, well, I want to be a millionaire and I want to have what millionaires have. I want to be able to spend like what millionaires spend, but they haven't become the person that does those things yet. A lot of times it's the process of becoming that is more important than just the process of doing. Because a lot of people can do those things, but they don't always reach that personal development level to say, this is who I am, and there's an identity there. And part of the reason of having a great coach and having people in your corner to keep you accountable, to say you can live into that, you can grow, and you can find different thoughts. And as you elevate your thoughts, you elevate your programming. Just like what you said, you're building a data center of saying, here's why this is true about me, and this and this and this. I thought that was a great takeaway. Thank you so much, Curtis, for being on today and sharing so many great points of value. I'm really grateful for that time that we've had. And I love being able to talk in your house. I think, was that 2 years ago? I think was when we met. So I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you again. And how do people find you online so that, if they're thinking about finding a thought coach, that they could come and connect with you on another more personal level?
Well, my first session is always free, and you can book a free session by going to my website, thought-coach.com. Or for those of you that are older than 40, thought-coach.com.
I love that distinction. That was beautiful. Well, thank you so much for that. And with no further ado, we'll just say thank you again for being on today, Curtis. Excellent amount of value that you shared. Guys, if you are looking for a thought coach, he's your guy. He is an an amazing individual. He's helped my sister-in-law immensely. So thank you for the breakthroughs you brought in her life. And I really appreciate the insight that you've given, the love and the value. So once again, thank you. And go to his website, thought-coach.com. That's amazing. And we'll see you guys next time. God bless.